Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever it is you are in the world, and welcome to another edition of Vampire the Masquerade, the YouTube experience, Zooster City. This evening we find a newcomer to the city. One Evelyn Yasmir, a traveler of sorts, someone who has come from a long way to establish themselves. And after a very long journey, coming through Canada, coming through Detroit, stopping off in Boston to help briefly with the endeavors there, a winning battle for the side of the Sabbat. She finally made her way, passing over a silly little city known as New York, and coming to a city where it is far easier to make a name for oneself in a time of turmoil in Zooster City. And Evelyn just currently tucked away in an abandoned car lot. Fortuitous that at one point this place used to be the home of someone else. Reminiscence of a large pig rolling around in a carport. Could be ascertained if one knew what to look for, but tonight a young woman with blonde hair stands over a young man tied onto one of the car racks, his arms and ankles bound, as Evelyn just very methodically cuts off each piece of clothing with a pair of medical shears. The man, well awake, gagged and making all sorts of terrible noises. This woman, who overpowered him almost effortlessly, snips his clothing off bit by bit by bit, her eyes intense, blue eyes just lingering on him as she continues to do it, watching the fear in his eyes, hoping to capture that essence to help with a bit of artwork she's planning. And so we start the scene with the muffled cries of a young man as Evelyn finally pulls the last bit of clothing away from his lower torso, leaving him quite prostrate and quite stark.
What's your Auspex rating?
Not applicable at the moment.
Okay. As she wonders of the marvels of flesh and blood on this young man, from behind her, like out of nothing, out of the shadows, out of the darkness, pops a voice. Do you know what you're doing here? And as she turns around, she sees a rather tall black man dressed in the robe of a priest, a top hat on his head. As he looks whatever she's about to do with this poor fella.
She turns about rather quickly, but her eye is somewhat deadpan as she stares at this man who's gotten the drop on her, and not unsurprisingly, she knows that she, as far as other Canaanites are concerned, if he is indeed a Canaanite, is not necessarily skilled yet in discerning them when they come about. She does, however, hold a hand slightly up from her waist as her feet take a wider stance, and she stares at him, almost looking like she's prepared to strike, but not quite going to at this point. She just looks at him. I am knowledgeable in what I'm about to do, yes.
Louis seizes up from head to toe, looks over to the man, takes circles around him for a moment, then stands next to the man, puts his gloved hand on his chest, looks back at her. Well, then show me.
She'll actually begin to take the leather coat off, and followed by the hooded sweatshirt, bit by bit taking articles of clothing off. And Louis may wonder what it is that she's preparing to do. And her body is very that of a very standard, average young woman. But she slowly begins to stretch out her neck as she begins to slowly undo the morning's flesh grafting, letting the grafted skin and muscle tone that normally isn't there when she awakens slowly slide away until she finally takes on a form that was given to her well before her embrace. Bare ribs just barely covering muscle tone, her skin growing pale, and any hints of a gender identity other than the shape disappearing as she climbs atop the car rack and upon the man who now has his eyes wide in terror, and she immediately sits on his chest and places her fingers upon his eyes, just around them, and bears down on them as she begins to use her fingers to mold into that flesh and paralyzing those eyes bit by bit so that the expression remains locked. And she seems to take a certain level of pride in her work as she pays Louis at this point almost no mind whatsoever.
Louis takes a few steps back and goes around the car to see her work from every angle. He goes tuck, tuck, tuck as his shoes hit on the pavement. Oh, I see. So what do you think you're gonna accomplish with sculpting this creature? Do you think you can actually transform it into something? And he just keeps walking around it as he talks to her.
No. This one is simply a reference material. I have no plans on metamorphosing this one.
And you think it's a good idea? He taps on the car to do this out here where everyone could stumble on you?
There is a certain thrill to potentially being caught, and it is an even greater thrill to hunt down those that may happen to stumble upon you.
Oh, really? That is very careless.
Careless maybe, but calculated, yes. Certainly.
Well, have you swooped the area before? Have you put on cameras that warn you when hunters may arrive?
I had chosen this spot as it seems to be very isolated and abandoned. Looks like no one's been here in well over 8 months. Almost a year, it seems.
Yeah, this place belonged to someone else long time ago. And he just proceeds to look as you mold this piece of meat and bone and blood into something it's not supposed to be, as you look like something you're not supposed to be. What's your name, girl?
What's in a name? It's a title. But my sire liked to call me Eveline.
Your sire liked to call you Eveline. What do you like to call yourself?
Eveline works.
Eveline. Well, Eveline, I've not seen you here before. You just snake in the city, right?
I've
All
only
silent.
arrived. There's word out within the local Sabbat cities for those that were looking for advancement, looking to make a name for themselves. There were several cities on the eastern seaboard. Boston. But it's very hard to get any work done in a war zone. There's New York.
You raise an eyebrow as you say New York.
But New York, you have to contend with many other factions. As I hear the Camarilla currently holds the city.
For now, we are doing our best. Well, not our best. We're doing Kane's work. Sooner rather than later, the ivory tower will fall and the glory of Kane will ascend upon New York once again.
Yeah.
And he just kind of stops behind you, and you can almost feel his gaze in your neck, like a sting that criticizes every move you do. Just like he's about to say, "You're doing that wrong." He doesn't though.
Shall continue to work into the eye sockets, the orbitals, and Papa Louie can hear the sound of bone curling itself away from where her fingers are as she continues to work. The ring shape that her fingers have taken upon to work down into the flesh and continue to very carefully work the eyes out of the head. And she doesn't say anything. Her eyes never break contact with this young man's as he struggles and screams. But it seems with Evelyn's legs hooked into uh, the car racks, sort of hollow spaces, and her legs holding them down, he can gain no sort of leverage with her bearing down on him as she is. And finally, as the gobs of flesh that she has attempted to pull away finally free themselves, he screams with the gag in his mouth, and she pulls away the two orbitals in perfect condition, pristine condition, and sets them to one side. And Louis can see, if he cares to, deep within the cavity of the brain and the sinuses and the soft palate that was behind the eyes not moments ago. Doing it wrong. Let me ask you, do you have the power over flesh and bone?
I do not. I have no ambitions for such lowly heights. It is, though, quite amusing to see it. It's a rather useful craft indeed. Sculpting the flesh and the bone, though to what end I always wonder.
Depends on the Kanate.
He looks at you, mend your flesh around you, shape your change to the most wonderful and terrifying things, I admit. But in the end, you're just painting a goat green. It's still a goat. Still just your body that you're crafting.
Might I ask, are you enlightened, my good sir?
Obviously I am. Oh, I haven't introduced myself. And gives a nod. Louis, Papa Louis, Bishop of New York. Welcome to Zuster.
Your faraway home, Louis, Papa Louis, Bishop of New York.
Well, for you, Eveline, it's still Your Excellency, Louis. And yes, I am far from home. I did call the city once home, but now it is less. Far, far less. For you, however, there's probably something to gain here. Something must have brought you here and your skills.
Oh, there were tales and rumors that the city is sorely lacking in my kind.
One would say there are enough. Others say there can never be enough Jamisi. It's not entirely true. You're not alone. Rather prominent Jamisi even resides in the city at this moment. Calls himself Murdoch Bratos. Ever heard that name?
No, I have not, but the surname is a derivative of my sire's. Or at least it sounds similar.
Really? Does it mean anything?
I would have to contact my sire, but I don't suppose you've ever heard of the Bradoviches?
He looks up. No,
revenant family of the Zamisi. At
Oh,
times, after
slave families.
yes, every so often one rises above their birthright and becomes something more.
Like the pandas did.
Hmm, perhaps. Although I don't think he'd appreciate it if you said that to him.
He doesn't appreciate a lot of things.
Hmm,
And
perhaps.
he goes over and looks at the mess you're creating, all the beauty, up to the beholder, I suppose. And so, at this point, the guy's dead, I'm pretty sure.
No, he's still very much
Oh.
alive and kicking. She hasn't damaged anything except the optic nerves and the
Mm.
orbitals.
So, you have. What is it, if I may ask, Eberline? What is it you're searching in that head?
I wish to see exactly where fear lies. And she points at the eyes, which are fixed in a terrified fashion. The goblets of flesh that she has removed, perfectly shaped and set inside of a plastic container. You see these eyes here. They hold that transcendent look. The, the image of fear and terror. And it's something that interests me to see. To look upon that and see where it resides beyond just the eyes and the expression of the face, but can it be seen in other parts of the body, in the organs, in the brain, the heart, the muscles?
You're looking for the soul, my dear.
Hmm.
For there's no purer emotion than fear. And emotions are expression of the soul.
She'll cant her head to one side as she's still looking down at the body, gently fixing or cauterizing capillaries and veins with her finger, sealing them off so they don't produce any more blood. And she just continues to look as she works, very slowly and very methodically. Your Excellency.
Could you repeat that? The last one? The last sentence?
Your Excellency, she asks.
Yeah.
Might I ask what form of enlightenment you find yourself upon?
What sort of a... And he's just like, pardon, my mind drifted off for a moment.
You walk a path, correct?
I walk many paths.
The one that you prescribe to in a spiritual sense.
Oh, I dedicate my own life, my intellect, my powers, to find the true nature of existence, to find, well, what some would call the soul. You see, flesh, bone, even blood, that's just a container. It's just a suit for the soul. Your body might be destroyed, it might be crippled, it might be burned. Your soul, though, and he steps closer, and he has almost like a charming smile. Your soul is what's precious about you. It's your soul that is immortal, not you. Your soul will live on, unbowed, unbent, unbroken, forever.
Do you know that in times past there were great brewmasters that would create wonderful concoctions? Wines, ales, meads, things of that nature. And at times, such creations would be placed in lavish containers, lavish vessels, if you will. And they worked in a very good symbiotic relation. These crafters of the brew and then the crafters of the container. The essence of what lies inside is important, but is not the container itself.
Well, some would say a healthy mind can only live in a healthy body, but given our condition, that's no longer really a requirement.
For some, not for others.
Oh,
Those that like to transcend the flesh and change it and reshape it, like myself. Somehow I have a feeling that we go nicely well hand in hand with those that study the soul, and I'm gonna have to make a roll real quick to see if on a roll intelligence and occult.
for what? Oh, to guess what path I am?
Yes.
Do you have law? Yes,
No, no lore. This
I
would
think you
be
have
a
so.
high difficulty occult roll, I would say.
Yeah. Let's roll difficulty 9 then.
All right. Why not? I'll spend a willpower for it. Intelligence and occult. Not a whole lot of dice to work with.
Is it more than 2?
It is 4, actually, and that's 2 successes.
Alright. Yeah, the death, and you're pretty sure your sire told you about a path called the death and the soul. And their followers are strange, but who isn't?
And she continues on with her sentence. And we go well hand in hand with those, the metamorphosists, along with those that study, I would assume, the death and soul.
He smiles and nods. Yes, quite correctly. Path of metamorphosis. Is that what the path you walk on now? Every path has its own rights and is valuable in their own way. Though there are not a lot of you left anymore.
No, I was brought up around it.
Some say you're relics of old times that have no place in an ever-changing world.
What better to come into an ever-changing world than those that are quite transient and changing at all times?
Maybe. Maybe. Well, do you find anything in him? And he points to the man.
As he still struggles, now blinded but not dead, feeling the air coming in, Louis can hear the odd sounds of air passing in through the sinus cavity that is now wide open, and this panicked breathing. And she takes her hands and almost seems to take a certain degree of pleasure as she runs her fingers down his neck to where the muscles are tightening and over his collarbones, and you can see that his arms and muscles, they contract and squeeze and flex as he tries to break free of his bonds. Here, you see here, and she points at the muscles.
Mm-hmm.
There's fear here. The struggle. It shows that he is not willing to yet cross over into the realm of your expertise.
You describe a problem I've encountered as well. You see, you can bring every soul, every mind, to a state where it realizes that death is inevitable and that death is nothing to be afraid of. It's something you should embrace, you should long for. I can bring mortals easily to that bridge, but what is truly frustrating is this body of us, body of theirs. They want to die, they want it, they beg you for it. Still though, and he kind of pokes with his finger onto the skin of the human, just kind of keeps pushing. This body, this meat bag, is resistant. Never knows when it's defeated.
It clings desperately to what it has only known. And she holds out her hand to Louis, wondering if he'll take it.
Yeah, he takes it.
She'll actually bring his hand down onto the bulging biceps, and she'll look into his eyes. Will you allow me to let you experience what I've been searching for?
You can try, young one.
She'll simply place one hand atop of his and guide it down to the flesh, and place the other hand onto the man's. And she is going to roll a dexterity and medicine, and
Okay.
trying to be extremely precise.
In doing what?
She's going to try and open the flesh on his hand.
On my hand.
Yes, so that it can actually sink through the man's and he can actually feel the muscle underneath in a much more
Oh,
intimate way.
yes, go
Something that
ahead.
she definitely plans to repair. And when she looks at him, there is no malice, no ill intent. It is almost as if she is attempting to guide him.
Oh, I'm not afraid. That's okay, go ahead.
Alright. 8 dice. And this is a difficulty 9.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see what happens. Alright. 1, 2, and with the specialty for precise.
Yep.
That is 4 successes.
Yeah. You do whatever you want to do with the hand, basically.
Louis will feel the nerves and the flesh, just the skin, however, part ways from the bottom side of his hand and actually curl very neatly up on top of his fingers as the man's flesh parts away. And for a moment, the undead flesh and the living flesh attempt to commingle. And for a brief moment, they make connections, but they don't last as he continues to writhe.
Hmm.
But he is able to feel the extreme tensing and contracting and all the struggle he can feel almost on a very sensual and intimate level, in a manner of speaking.
He closes his eyes to live through all the sensations of the flesh and the mind. Huh. That is rather interesting.
Now hold fast here, Your Excellency, or I will give you your end of expertise. And with that, she just simply takes her free hand down into the man's open cavities and just begins to work into the brain with her fingers, parting the flesh of the brain and essentially undoing all the connective tissue bit by bit until the brain literally begins to cease to function, and she can feel, or he can feel, the last few death throes, and he can feel that moment as the blood begins to pump weaker, as the body's heart begins to slow and slow and slow. And with any luck, giving him a very unique experience, even for someone who has experienced death as many times as he.
He holds his hand steady. He looks over into the eyes of the man, or whatever's left of the eyes. Copes with death, and he leans forward to see the soul depart in the eyes. And he can feel the contractions on the connected muscle tissues and nerves. He smiles. Thank you, that was rather interesting. And he takes his hand out of the man and he just starts healing it with his own blood. And he takes out a coin from his robe and places it under the tongue of the man. And he starts mumbling. He starts speaking. Does your character speak French?
No.
Alright. Well, it does sound French. As he's whispering. Does she react in any way?
No, she just continues. Her eyes look quizzical and, or rather, inquisitive, and she just watches him as he does what it is he's doing, watching it with a certain interest.
He finishes takes his hand away from his chin. Oh, he's gone. Ah, so sad. Not, you see, not everyone, or not every soul is willing to give up their secrets so easily. Do you know the name of this one?
She frowns and simply turns her head towards the pile of clothing laying.
Ah, suppose not too important, really. He looks at his hand that is at this point completely healed. Feels it. That was rather sensational, I have to admit.
I have studied for many years. My sire saw to it when I was serving him as a ghoul to watch him as he worked. And,
I'm pretty sure he'd be proud. He'd certainly do good work.
well, he did this to me, and she actually holds the hand up and shows or sort of highlights the features of her rather malformed body.
Oh, it does suit you rather well. There's beauty in the flesh. He doesn't look like he can actually see what she's showing him. Looks like he's just looking right through her. Well, there's always a need for women with your talents and ambitions. I do hope you have ambitions, Eveline.
They are varied and they are many. They fall around many varied tastes, and I'm hoping that while I continue to get closer to an evolution of what I am in my flesh, that I can also take a step forward within the Sword of Cain and make a name for myself.
That is good. The Jamisi have a role to play. Positions to acquire. Sabbat needs your kind, it needs your blood. You cannot be led by La Sombra, after all.
No, not entirely.
Well, not at all, I would hope, but that is up to you. This city holds many rewards for those that are willing to show the ambition for it. I'll hope I will hear of your exploits and ambitions.
It will take time and careful study of the Cainites of the city to see.
You have time.
Nothing but time.
Also, something else you should be aware of. Hunters have been in the city before, and it seems like they have returned. So you might want to be a bit more careful starting out in the open. Do you have a haven?
Not yet. I had planned on perhaps going to ground nearby.
Do you have a place to stay at the moment?
No.
And he just pulls out a like a bundle of cash and puts it on the car. This should suffice for at least a hotel room. I wouldn't want a promising young one as you to be taken away in the night by hunters.
It's not the night that I worry about with the hunters.
Well, either way, although just there's many temptations, many prizes, it also has its dangers.
This I can understand. I don't suppose you know of the current political state and the current state of the individual packs of the city.
I do know quite a bit about it. Dear Archbishop Kim Merriweather. And what's your empathy?
Ooh. It is not abysmal. Wow. Never mind, it is abysmal. She has no empathy. And
Okay.
rightfully so.
Never mind then. Bishop Kim Merriweather of the blood of La Sombra, Archbishop I should say, rules over the city. At her side, the most notable bishop in the city would be Bishop Chunk.
That is
Other-
the first time her face actually shows a bit of confusion as she leans forward and narrows her eyes as much as she can with her current form, but she just Chunk.
a panda.
Ah,
I know, it's an abomination that one of that blood, of that mongrel blood, sits in the council of bishop, but Chunk has proven its worth. I'm not the one to deny him what he earned. Nonetheless, I think you will like him. Or maybe not. I hope you don't.
weigh people on their merit and not their blood.
For someone who practices the art of metamorphosis, you should pay a bit more attention to blood.
There's wisdom in your words, but at the same time I have seen many transcend their blood.
Anyway, there are multiple packs in the city. The Time Bandits control much of the south these days. 40k, Kane's Bastard, the Reborn, the Blitzkrieg. They all inhabit the city. Some are more civil than others.
I'd heard a rumor in Detroit that the locusts had fallen on the city. Are they still here?
Here, the Locusts.
They go by many names.
Oh, yes. Well, you might want to stay away from Arbor Heights.
That's all I needed to know. Well, Your Excellency, let's see. I have taken up enough of your time, and it seems with hunters running around, I should probably clean up.
Yes, you can have his body. I will collect its soul.
And she smirks as she begins to lean down and simply bite into the neck. And she begins to gorge on the blood. To help.
Louis watches Evelyn for a while. Then you can hear in the distance of the sensation of the blood, for blood is, after all, it's your new heroin. You can hear how he steps back. And steps back. After there's just a voice left that says, "I'll have my eye on you. Good night." And with that he disappears in the shadows once again, to leave her to her morbid business.
Evelyn, for her part, will gorge as much blood as she can out of this freshly deceased body before breaking it down into base components, making it unrecognizable and undistinguishable from a standpoint, making identification a bit more troublesome, before finally collecting her prize with these two affixed eyes that she will use for reference in later endeavors in flesh crafting, before finally going to ground for the evening, using the generous donation from Bishop Louis. And I think there we can end our scene.